Just clear the throat a little bit.
I know.
Hello,
Yeah.
everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to America Disclosing Uncensored. Today, I have a fantastic person with me on the show. He's the president and owner of a magnificent site in the Americas known as the America Stonehenge. And it's a site uh, open to the public, and North America was sometimes used as a picnic ground for in past times. People not knowing exactly what was being stood on. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis. This is located actually, I believe, in what is known as Is it North Salem, New Hampshire?
Michael, yes, good day. The name of the town is North Salem, and we are in New Hampshire. People often mix us up with Salem, Massachusetts, which is about 30 miles away. So it is North Salem, New Hampshire, right in the southern part of New Hampshire.
Okay, well, thank you for keeping me on base with that there. So you built a legacy there with your father and some predecessors that you'll be talking about. I'm going to leave that all up to you. Dennis also more fabulous and all that as an adventurer of archaeology and fantastic sites that he's visited. I'm sure he'll bring up many and describe to us in America what we truly have here and what we walk by possibly every day, and sometimes by making the mistakes of what we remove. Dennis is going to have a book coming out that will be released very soon. He will also tell us about that. And we'll let him drop any hints that he wants to only. I won't provoke him too much unless he wants to talk about what's been found at Oak Island. But besides that, following in his father's footsteps, which I think is every young man's dream to be behind their father and enjoying the work that and legacies that we accept into. Um, so it's going to be a very interesting read of history, the place, his family, and so forth. Uh, so with that said, I want to get into one other part. And try to do the best I can to compliment my guest because he deserves that. Everyone does. Dennis is the president of America's Stonehenge. He is a graduate from Daniel Webster College, which he graduated in 1977 with a degree in aviation, quite different management. Um, it was a full-time commercial pilot for over 35 years. I envy that. I do. I want to talk about just for a quick minute on that with you. You retired in 2016, and America's Stonehenge was opened to the public in '58 by Dennis's father, Robert Stone. Dennis has been involved with America Stonehenge since you could crow. I'm just going to say, I mean, truly, you love boats, you love classic cars, you love discovery, you love travel, and you visited many ancient sites throughout the world. And some may say, did you go to all seven continents?
No, I've been to Africa, I've been to Europe, and let's see, I've been to Mexico several times. Next destination is South America if we can. But I've been as far west as Rhodes, and we've been to Malta, and I want to get to Egypt, but I've been to Africa. So not all seven continents, though, unfortunately.
Very interesting. Hey, well, you're still young in life. I mean, hey, I'm 65. I hope I get some things done before, and I'm going to have to get some of that magic water from you too. But we'll talk more about that and the possibility of that future coming to one of America's histories there. I mean, it seems like it's the fountain of youth in our conversation in the green room prior to this. But also, you've taken a number of courses, and as I said, have traveled extensively, I guess, with your father, by yourself, with your family. And that just sounds like a fabulous life. It really does. First, you're flying in these airplanes. Just to take a quick moment, I'm not fond of planes. I'm not. I don't know why. I don't know why that is. I've had many dreams that I was flying. Don't know what that's about, but it's a fact. Whether I was astro projecting, whatever. And I don't want to come off sounding like some kook, but we don't understand all dreams, I don't think. But I just find that fascinating to be up there and to control a commercial airliner to come in, take off, land, and how safe are we in the skies is what I want to ask you because I want to start traveling.
Yeah. Well, they say it's the safest form of travel, but I flew for 42 years and 35
Wow.
with the airlines and a couple other years doing sightseeing rides, and aerial advertising at night, and then flight instruction and even fire patrol. And it's a very safe, I mean, we're trained very well by the airlines, and the equipment's pretty amazing. There are occasionally, as you see on TV, issues with mechanical situations. I had three engine failures in my 30,000 hours of flying, and the planes flew fine. With the engine, they were multi-engine aircraft. If you have a single engine, you're going to probably have to get it on the ground pretty quickly. But with multi-engine aircraft, they're meant to fly in one engine or two engines, depending on how many engines they have. And but the training was pretty amazing. In each of the cases, my co-pilot and I, we handled the situation. We got the passengers on the ground, and it turned out safe, which is good. So yeah, I feel comfortable flying. I mean, there's always a chance of something happening, and that does make the news. A small plane going down in California, we'll hear about it in New Hampshire. A car accident down the street, we may not ever hear about it. So it kind of makes the news. It gets kind of sensationalized, and it is, of course, a serious thing. But I mean, I miss it. I haven't flown in I guess, almost 7 or 8 years now. And I flew from 74 all the way up to about 2016 when I retired. And I've been up in small planes since then. And I've flown commercially on my airline. I flew for American at the end, so we get the travel benefit. I had 27 years longevity there. And then in the 80s, I flew for UPS. We did a lot of nighttime flying. That was kind of interesting. And I flew with a lot of Vietnam and Korean War pilots. By the time I got on, a lot of the World War II pilots had to retire. It was a 60-year-old mandatory time period. And they would tell me stories about what their experiences were. But one of the things, of course, is UFOs, and that's always interesting. But I have to say, of all the years I flew, my sightings were always on the ground. We saw things in the air, but they weren't close encounters that you could really say, oh, I just saw a UFO kind of thing. Usually things in the distance, which could be a landing light, could be a star that's hidden by a cloud suddenly, But some of the guys I flew with did see things, overseas while they were flying during like Vietnam and Korea. They say we saw things we couldn't explain. So that was always interesting to talk about that while you're cruising along for a couple hours, Right. But most of my conversations later were all about with my co-pilots and even flight attendants sometimes, usually in the back, of course, but was about these ancient sites. And I had to say, most of them never heard of our site or some of the other sites, And so the conversation, might have a 3-hour trip flying along, and we're talking about this site and what it is or possibly was, and that really killed the 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever the length of the flight was pretty quickly. Next thing you know, you're getting ready for landing, So that was a lot of fun, So, and I still stay in touch with some of the people I flew with, And sometimes they visit us at the museum, which is always nice to see guys that you work with and girls from years ago, So it's always nice.
Bring back memories of your life to you. And it's always great to reminisce and to have that ability to be able to do so. And it's always, I'm sure, a very pleasant surprise to see a face walking up to the, I want to, I guess you would call it your welcoming building.
Yeah, we call it the visitor center. In the years past, we call it the lodge. It's part of it's been there since 1957 when my dad was getting the place going. And our neighbor up in the town where we lived, Gary, New Hampshire, about 8 miles away, was a guy that actually built it. And back in those days, things weren't quite as expensive as And I got the actual bill for the building from 57, and I think it was $2,300 for the complete building. Oops, I'm sorry. I got I don't know if you know my friend L.A. Mazzulli from L.A. Mazzulli, but he's trying to call me right now. I got to get rid of that.
Yeah, I think I lost
your listeners. Yeah. So yeah, he's another researcher, and he does a lot of stuff in South America and video TV. But he's trying to get a hold of me. He's doing a project with us coming up in September, and then he's heading to Ireland with his crew. He's got a couple of archaeologists. That's a whole different subject, but. Yeah, so the building was put up in 57. In 1994, my wife quit her corporate job. She was working at Chrysler Financial. She had been with TRW, and she was working also with Waddell and Reed Financial. So she was in the financial sector. She had a master's degree, but she decided just to run the business, and it was wonderful. She got a mortgage. We put up a new visitor center, which is there today. And it's much larger. It has a theater. We have, of course, new restrooms. We have a book corner, a gift shop. We have an artifact room. So and it's open year round. Back in the early days, we closed, I think, in October for the winter. We
Right.
pulled the pump out of the ground. We put shutters up. We closed the whole place down until I think it was April we used to open up. But by the 90s, we stayed open year round. And we have visitors. In fact, today in this terrible weather, we had some visitors. I can't believe they actually came up in this weather to tour the site, but they did, you know. So we're open every day but Christmas and Thanksgiving now.
Well, that's pretty exciting, to live a dream into retirement, to almost like reworking, but reworking a love. And that's probably where I guess we should start our grand roots of maybe a couple questions for you. What got you started into all this? I mean, truly, knowing you were there and this is a family type endeavor and whatnot, but what made you fall in love with this? This compassion for it.
Yeah, because I was there when I was 18 months old. I basically that's my whole memory of childhood. As you mentioned earlier, is kind of growing up and crawling around there, I guess initially, and then walking around as a child, you know, and growing up with a place. We only lived about 7 or 8 miles from the place, so we were down there quite often, of course. And I just grew up with it. I didn't know anything different really. And a lot of our vacations during the 60s and 70s, I had one sister, uh, and we would not go to like Disneyland. We'd go to see these ancient sites around New England, pretty much. You know, that was our vacation. And now I really appreciate that, especially looking back at photographs and seeing some of the different sites that we saw back then. So it was really in our blood. You know, my dad had a passion for this. He started out after high school working a couple of jobs, and then he ended up in the Coast Guard in the early 50s. And he got based, he was hoping to get based, I think, in Hawaii or something. Like his one of our relatives kind of talked him into the Coast Guard, and he was based in Greece, he was based in Hawaii, he was based in all these, you know, Alaska. My dad ended up in up in Labrador, actually.
Hmm.
And he said he did the Battle of Labrador during the early 50s. But I think he liked it up there too. And he was very close to where the Vikings landed in Lonzo Meadow, which we got a chance to visit last August. And I can see why he liked it up there. It's actually a beautiful area, Newfoundland, that whole area. And you can look across where he was based in Labrador. It's right across, you know, a channel. And we didn't have quite enough chance to go over there on the ferry. But he was interested in history. He was just interested in Vikings. He was interested in Native American. He was interested basically in the past. But the Viking site wasn't known until about 60, 61 when they actually identified what it was. And there's no doubt that he would have gone over there and visited it, you know. Then he got
Right.
a job with AT&T Bell Laboratories as an engineer. He took up electronics in the Coast Guard. That's why he was based at that long-range navigation, and that's used for aircraft and shipping. So he was working there for the Coast Guard. After 1953, joined AT&T Bell Laboratories. He stayed there for 30 years. He got married. I was born in 54. And they built our home in Derry. My mom helped them. Some relatives, they actually hand built our house. It's still there today. And then on a Friday night, just like we're doing right now, it was a radio show, and it was called Yankee Arms. And the host was Alton Hall Blackington. And he had been on the radio for many years, and then he got onto the TV side of things back in the mid 50s. But his show was about all sorts of stuff in New England. He actually authored a couple books about this, and I have one of them. I have one of his books. We just got that about 2 months ago, which is pretty cool. So on a Friday night at 7:30, just listening to the radio show like he did. He even listened to it up in Alaska. At night, you could get it on the skip wave AM, and it
Hmm.
was one of the biggest stations out of New England. It's WBZ Radio. They're still around. They've been around for 85 years, I think now. And the topic was his site. He had never heard of it, no idea what the site was. And again, he was only about 7 or 8 miles from where the site is. It kind of blew him away, this whole topic. Coincidentally, a few days later after the show, he's at a barber shop just waiting to have his hair cut. And he picks up a magazine, he's flipping through it, and there's pictures and a whole story about the same site. And he, again, you know, he had never heard of this place, and twice in a week now he's got this site that's only a few miles away. It's kind of a mystery. It's been on radio. It's in this magazine. And he turned to the barber who's still working on somebody's hair. And he goes, "Hey, do you mind if I borrow this magazine?" He goes, "Well, how old is that?" He goes, "It's 1952. It's 3 years old." And the barber says, "Take it with you. You can have it." And my dad and my mom that weekend, we were at my aunt and uncle's in the same town. And they were having just an evening with about 10 guests. and they were playing cards, probably drinking some beer, having a nice time. That was a pretty much a tradition on Saturday nights for many, many years. And I was very young, as I mentioned, and my dad passes the magazine around. Nobody knew what this place was. It was so typical. The site was not known by many people until my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister and her husband, looked at it and said, wait a minute, we used to go there in the 1930s, and they were one of the picnickers you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show. It had been a picnic area in the 1800s too. But my aunt and uncle said, yeah, we used to go there. We would ride our bicycles down. They actually pedaled, 7 or 8 miles down the road and picnicked on top of the hill. Because my dad's next question is, can you find the place? And during that time, it was not open to the public. It had never been open to the public. When people went up there, they were basically trespassing, I guess, but not a big deal because it had been going on for a long time. But that Sunday morning, the four of them drove around looking for it. There's no road signs, there's no visitor center, there's no parking lot, and they recognized an old dirt road from 20 years prior, and they walked up there taking a chance that this was the place. And they got to the top, and sure enough, there's the site, and it's surrounded by a 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on top that was put up by the very first researcher in 1937. My dad found a hole under the fence and again snuck underneath the fence and went away for probably an hour or so. And the rest of them stayed outside. They didn't want to climb underneath his chain link fence. It's kind of, can rip your skin and clothes and kind of hard to get under there. And when he came back out, he was just blown away by the site and said something about, I'd like to get involved with this site, the research, the study, and hey, maybe even open it up to the public. And my mom immediately said, you got rocks in your head, with everything he's got going on. He was even going to college nighttime at that time too, in a new family. So, but he did, because right after that, he pursued it and eventually met the owner. And we, in the green room, we were talking about Malcolm Pearson, and he was the owner of the site at the time. And he had inherited the site from the first researcher, William Goodwin, in 1950, when Goodwin passed away, because of all the hard work that Malcolm did photographing the site and actually a lot of upkeep of the site. At the end of Goodwin's life, in the late 40s, he was quite sick. He lived in Hartford, Connecticut, and he couldn't get up there he was just couldn't get up there. So Malcolm was really kind of left in charge and then inherited the site. So my dad worked out an agreement by the late 50s. By 57, they had worked it all out. My dad put up the visitor center, and in 58, unofficially on the summer solstice, coincidentally, because we didn't know that the site had astronomical alignments, they opened up the site to the public. It was a month later that the governor came and there was the official opening. I think it was I'm going to say July 12th. It's in my book, the actual date of opening. And the name of the place at the time was the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire. It quickly became Mystery Hill Caves, but it was still officially the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire. And so in 1959, the name became Mystery Hill Caves. And the Saturday Evening Post, which is a nationwide magazine, did a full feature on this site, which is a nice way to start the business, and in the museum, if you will, getting people interested. But it's been kind of an up and down, over the years with people coming or a slow year and that kind of thing. And by 1963, we dropped the word caves, because caves are generally thought of as kind of natural formations in rock, so we dropped the word caves. The American Cave magazine used to list us as as caves. And when we changed the name, they continued carrying us in their book or magazine, and they put it down as artificial caves. So last year we had our 65th anniversary. In 1971, the state of New Hampshire actually recognized us finally and made us a state historic site. So we're a state historic site of New Hampshire. And like most state historic sites, they're on private property. There are a few that are owned by the state and run by the state, like the Robert Frost Farm up in the White Mountains. Up in Derry, New Hampshire, the same town I was mentioning. It's still, as my dad said, we're not a very well-known site. But that's not our intentions, it's which shows like what you're doing here that helped to spread the word that not only our site, but there's about 800 of these sites from Quebec and Ontario all the way down to Virginia that have similar features that we think are prehistoric, not the works of farmers or early homesteaders or, people that came over after Columbus. These sites are actually with different types of methods, like dating methods. Like one of the newer ones is optically stimulated luminescence, which we had done on our site. carbon datings. We've done 16 of them since 1967. And also the astronomical data we did from a survey from 73 to 77. The Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics did the analysis of that. And by 78, the results were that if this site was used for astronomical purposes, the alignments would work about 1800 BC. And that's due to the Earth's tilt slowly changing. They call it the obligity cycle. It's a
Right.
41,000 year cycle. And so, even astronomically, the site goes back to roughly about 4,000 years when we think the initial construction began on the site. The carbon dating seemed to support that. And we have stone tools, hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers that have been found on the site, among other stone tools. But the big slabs of stone, they cover the main site, the roof slabs, the wall slabs, the sacrificial table, and the astronomical alignments. Those stones are actually taken off the bedrock, and there's no modern tool markings on the quarry socket where the stone came out or on the slabs themselves. And
Wow.
one of our guys, David Stewart Smith, died in 2016. He was with us for almost 40 years. And he identified by 1989 on what we have about 15 acres where the astronomical alignments are, and then 90 acres beyond that, more stones, features, structures, and so forth. But on that 15 acres, he focused on that, and he had been with us from 78 to 89, so 11 years by that time, almost 12 years. And he put together a monograph, and he identified 300 slabs, again, that were quarried. And they were quarried, and then they were shaped using a technique called percussion flaking. It's like making an arrowhead, using stone against stone, not metal tools. And that was
Ironstone.
yeah, so that's 1989. And since then, we've identified about 34 big slabs still in situ that were lifted off the bedrock. These are multi-ton stones, propped up with another stone. And then you can see that the edges of them look like they're scalloped, and that's where the stone was being struck. If you look at an arrowhead, you see a little scalloping or a stone
Right.
knife or even a
Yeah.
stone hoe. We have those in our display case too. But this is on a big scale. And so we have all sorts of evidence suggesting that the site's a prehistoric site, not the works of some crazy farmer, which is one of the myths that's been spread over the
Yeah.
century, actually, about the site. So that's kind of the site in a nutshell. But it does cover about 110 acres almost of features, but it's only one again of about 800 across the Northeast.
That's crazy. And yeah, I stay involved on some of these things. I have some other shows coming up on structures, building times, different nights of the world, and things like that. I just find this to be so fascinating because, like I said, what you are doing is you are writing history for us. You're giving a future for our children and even us adults who just we're in this place of we want knowledge, we want to understand it. So this may not be in a follow up that I we were talking about in questions, but when you talk about the one particular part of the site that it was through astroastrology, and this is like a stone time clock, so to speak. Um, how or have you been able to conclude in any way, even to assume how so much was known at such a early primitive time period to where all these alignments are just so magnificently put into order and utilized to reflect and identify seasons of the year and so forth?
Yeah, it is pretty amazing that these people would have time. They're trying to live, clothe themselves, feed themselves and shelter themselves. That they'd have time to do this, but in fact they did. And it's not only in the Northeast, but around the world. These what we call megalithic type sites, and the word comes from two Greek words, big stones, basically. And they're finding it these megalithic sites, which are actually on 6 out of 7 continents now. They're in Australia, New Zealand. They're in Asia. They're in Western Europe, has over 50,000 of them, and South America too. Not the Inca, but way before that. Like in Ecuador, there's these. If you look at the pictures, they look so much like what you see of what we call a megalithic type site. But they're astronomically aligned too. With the sun, the moon, and stars. Perhaps during the hunter-gathering area, they had to also kind of keep track of the seasons. In different parts of the world where that's needed for the migration of animals, for instance. Whether it's animals that are in the air, animals on land, or even in streams, and that kind of thing. So that was important for hunting, and also getting ready for the winter, where again that's appropriate in the different seasons. They say sheep herders too were some of the earliest astronomers. They'd be out at night tending their flock, watching the heavens, and they'd see cycles in the sky, things happening with the
Right.
planets, with the sun, with the moon, and the stars. But Stonehenge is about 5,000 years old, and it took about 1,500 years, they believe, to build Stonehenge. But again, it's one of 50,000 megalithic sites. Uh, and it evolved over time in three stages from what we know today. Stage one, two, three, ABC. I've been there several times. And so it's aligned with the sun and moon in that case. But, Gobekli Tepe was an astounding find. I think
Right.
1994, they thought it was still a medieval site, and now it dates back almost 11,700 years. And it seems to be astronomically aligned. I think the jury's somewhat still out, but the artwork is beautiful on it. And again, I've read one of the books indicating it was aligned to the heavens. So I think they'll have to do a little more research on that, but that
Mm.
site may be astronomical. That's pretty early in time too. They
That's
weren't
yeah.
supposed to be. They shouldn't be there, really.
Right,
They
and
shouldn't really.
I think even more recently now I made documentation to this. I don't have it in my mind, but I find these things fascinating that something even older now has uh, come into the light. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not
Yeah,
prepared.
yeah,
But I don't know if you've heard anything about that. But yeah, it's like we were doing something to follow the stars and these movements. Maybe that's,
mm,
I think worldwide, somebody once said that there's probably 100,000 of, across the entirety of the world. You have these pyramids, they're all over the world.
yeah,
People were moving around too, and like you said, so when they knew certain times of the year were coming and they could identify it, then maybe these areas were needed to be in place so they could move from one site to another site to thrive, to continue to thrive and stay healthy. And that
mm,
could be a possibility that some of the same people that were the earliest builders, like you have on your premises, America Stonehenge, could have possibly been in Virginia as well. They traveled the path of the weather and went to a different type of climate, all for survivals and so forth. So they could be maybe possibly one type of indigenous or earlier that
mm.
was trying to just, have sanctuaries always
Sure.
available to
Yeah.
themselves, building here, building. Maybe they are the great builders that made everything tick, you know?
It does seem like that whole era is kind of lost in history, if you will, and that these people were quite capable. And if you were going to go long distances, certainly you wanted to navigate, especially on water or open, area where there's not too many landmarks. So celestial navigation, especially in the ocean too, So if you were into astronomy, like the people were at Stonehenge and other sites, you did have a pretty good idea. Of what was going on overhead, and you could use that actually to help steer you in certain directions. And we call it celestial navigation today. In fact, one of the planes I flew at UPS was a Lufthansa plane before it, got painted up in UPS, and it still had the this overhead in the 727 because it's a three-seater captain, co-pilot, flight engineer. And I was a flight engineer on the plane, and right over my head, they had it set up for celestial navigation. And that was a 1968 aircraft. That was pretty cool. I had never seen that before. We didn't use that, of course. We used, VOR navigation. GPS hadn't quite come in the 80s, of course. But also when you're a farmer, you need to know again when to plant the seed and when to harvest the seed. So watching the heavens was important too for that. So I think you were much more tuned into the heavens above, and some of our features on our site might reflect that. And one of them that we found was a serpentine walls, starting right after we retired in 2016. And some people suggest in the northern hemisphere, the constellation Draco, which is a dragon or a serpent, may have been inspirational for that. And I don't know how many of your listeners have heard of the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. It's in Peoples, Ohio. And we got a chance to visit that last year too. And I've been reading about it for decades. And I used to fly through Ohio all the time with the airline, but I never got a chance to visit it. So we were there last year. We visited some of the other mounds. Ohio, they think at one time had about 10,000 mounds. About 90% of them are gone due to natural causes and man-made causes. But the Great Serpent Mound was just put on the UNESCO World Heritage Site last September. And we were there just before that. They're getting excited about getting recognition, that kind of recognition, you know. Our sites have not got that kind of recognition, but that is 1,350 feet long. It's amazing. It's huge, and they do think it's possibly inspired by that constellation Draco. We can't talk to the builders, obviously, but we now have, I think, at our site, 14 serpent walls. They can be either straight, what we call linear. Some have a 90-degree bend for the head or tail. Some are S-shaped. And a couple of them we think are actually what we call the Ouroboros. And the Ouroboros, I never knew anything about it until 2016 or 2017 when one of our visitors told me about that. You know, it's pretty cool. And an Ouroboros is just basically a snake biting its tail. You can see it in some of the Native American artwork out west, but it's also in Europe, and it was Egyptian and Greek too. And that symbol could mean wisdom, infinity, wholesomeness, protection. It had different meanings. And you can see different meanings if you Google the Ouroboros. But we think we have three of those possibly at our site. And one of them is the watch house. And that's a satellite chamber, about 300 feet from what we call the main site.
Okay.
And that structure is just simply amazing. It has so many functions to it, and they're all slowly revealing themselves just in the last few years. But as far as the serpent part of it, the glacial boulder looks like the head of a serpent. It's just a natural boulder. It's pretty cool looking when you look at it, and the fact that we never recognized this because of so much brush and trees, and we weren't looking for it. You know, and even Mr. Goodwin back in the 1930s, the first researcher, studied the chamber. He never noticed it either. But it's a head of a 2,550-foot serpent, and as you look behind it, the wall undulates up and down, up and down, and up and down, and it goes around counterclockwise. It touches every astronomical foresight. So when you have an astronomical alignment, you need like a gun sight. You need two markers, you know, stone or wood or something, and you have your back sight near you, and you look from that one over to the one in the distance, and that's the foresight. The foresight markers are part of that body that go around, and it goes around 15 acres. It goes back in front of the head, and it does one more hump. And we always looked at that hump. We said, why is that wall shaped like that? It's just kind of a, you know, it's just like a big crescent or something shape to it. We look at it, shake our head, didn't know what it was. But then right in front of the face of what would be the snake, the tail, in other words, would actually turn 90 degrees and ends with a pointed tail. And we never noticed that. And it was right in front of our eyes. In that case, it looks like the serpent's biting on the side of its tail. Usually the Ouroboros is the tail's in the mouth, but sometimes it's biting on the side. I've seen both types of artwork, you know. And so that would be twice as long as the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which they claim is the biggest snake effigy in the world.
Right.
I think possibly it might end up being that's the biggest earthen serpent or effigy in the world. And our wall would be the biggest stone effigy or biggest effigy. Maybe, you know, I mean, the jury's still up, but when you look at it, it's like how unmistakable this is. And that 15 acres may be considered perhaps the sacred area. And then outside of that might be the profane, you know, the unsacred, you know, area of the site. But that's one of 14 at our site. And we found out after that there's over 400 of them in one town in Connecticut called North Stonington. And that has 8,000 structures. The book came out in 2016 by a guy named Mark Starr, and he goes by Markham Starr. And he lived there for 30 years by then, and he wrote this book. And he writes for a New England magazine called Yankee Magazine. It's a pretty big deal up here. It's probably like Southern Comfort, but he writes in there. He writes about New England fishing villages. And by 2016, he had been working on a book for a few years all about his town. And he said, I don't think farmers built these 8,000 structures, and there are 25 categories of structures, including serpent walls, standing stones, chambers, you know, cairns, and all sorts of features. And when I picked that book up, I had never heard of that book. It just came out at a meeting in Groton, Connecticut, not too far from North Stonington, next door pretty much. It was an archaeological meeting, and I picked the book up. I'm looking and I go, what is this? On the back cover, 8,000 structures, 250 or 270 photographs, 25 categories of structures. And as I'm flipping through it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is all about one town. And we knew Connecticut had sites in Danbury, Thompson, Thompson, Moodus, and Groton, and other places, we never heard of North Stonington having one structure. And my dad never mentioned it, and he'd been in it for decades. So it blew me away. And then I'm looking, I'm like, oh my God, he's got serpent walls. And that's what I thought I had at my site without no frame of reference. And there were over 400 of those in that one town. They measure from 30 feet up to 300 feet. They can be linear, rectilinear, S-shaped, and some, I guess, come around like ours, just like what we had at our site. And I'm like, that kind of clinched it for me that we might be on the right track, that we have what we call serpent walls. After that, a lady spoke from Denver, and she spoke about the land that's very flat below Nebraska. And we had been in that area before. We've been to Mesa Verde and other sites on the southwest part of Colorado, but never in that area. So we've been out there though, and she talks about a couple counties, and she starts showing she did it by Skype, so I couldn't talk to her in person. You could talk to her after the thing, but there were 100 people there. Good luck trying to talk, and she was only on for a few minutes after her lecture. And so I wish she had come out, flew out, but that's very expensive. So anyway, she starts showing her cairns, chambered cairns, standing stone, just like the presentation by Mark Starr, except without trees. I'm like, gosh, it looks like the same presentation, the same kind of stonework. Then she gets into her serpentine walls, and I'm like, one of them looked just like one of our 14. And the other thing she showed is walls that are shaped like the letter D as in Delta. They're in North Stonington and elsewhere, just a big area surrounded by a wall that's shaped like the letter D. And I found our first one in 1977. And when you come into our visitor center today, we have a diorama that I built while I was in college 45 years ago. And as I built it, I was looking at it going, wow, we got a D-shaped wall way back then, but didn't give it any further thought. She has the same thing out there. So some of our features go out to near Denver, just east of it. But then after that, a friend from Connecticut who lives near North Stonington, he's big into all of this. He sends me photographs from near Mount Shasta in California, a town called Weed in that general area. And it's more open. They don't have as many trees. And they're showing the same wall patterns that we have here on the East Coast. So these things go from here to California, we think. And last summer, a couple visited us from Winnipeg, Canada. And she's working on turtle-shaped effigy, stonework, and serpent. And Parks Canada, which is big up in Canada, that's their national park system, is actually working with her on her serpentine walls and her turtle. And her sister moved to New Hampshire, so she drove out. She drove back. She didn't fly. And on the way back, she was sending me all these photographs. I'm like, wow, that looks like what we have here. And they're in Alabama, too. Dr. Harvey Holstein, 4 years ago, I got in contact with him. He's been working on his different stonework, including standing stones and huge cairns down in Alabama. And he works at Jacksonville State University. And he has his walls he calls rattlesnake walls. And they're a little bit smaller than the ones we have in New England. But they're the same idea, stone wall shaped like a snake. So he knows about us. He's invited us to go down there and see his area too.
Wow.
They're all
Yeah,
over the country.
great.
And they're in Canada. Like I mentioned, they're in Ontario, Canada too, near Hamilton, Canada. So what is all this? I don't know. And my dad, I think he died in 2009. He would be blown away by all of this. He had
Right.
when he died, none of this was actually known at that time. In 2009. So
But I
mm,
think a lot of good people were trying to disclose or to enlighten people with knowledge that there were many things going on around the planet. I mean, if you fly, as you are a pilot commercial, we learned that there are certain parts and areas in this world that you can fly over as if something from the sky was putting designs all over the mountaintops and putting in what may have been landing strips or these serpent type mounds. But you have other people who speculate, like in Ohio, as you brought up, just to go back a little bit into the conversation, that it had to do with giants or burial ceremonial places that were developed. But I don't think anybody truly knows what and why a lot of these things have taken place or why they were so monumental of a function for people. But maybe it was through religious belief that they did things like that were progressing from what they were doing in the earlier days. Did you ever find on your property any evidence of how they could establish such movements of such megalithic sized stones? Was there anything on your particular within America's Stonehenge 110-acre property?
Great question. That's always a question. How do they move these, these stones that weigh multiple tons, Our late David Stuart Smith, I mentioned a little bit earlier, joined us in 1978, and he was from Connecticut originally, and that state is loaded with these sites. He left there around 72. He went to work in England, in Scotland, and I think he went to Wales too. But he worked for what is called English Heritage,
Mm,
and today back then it was called the Ancient Monument Group or whatever, part of the British government. In the early 80s, they changed it to English Heritage. They combined a couple of different departments. But he was there for about 6 years, and he worked on medieval structures and also megalithic sites, repairing them, in Scotland and England. So he learned to become a master stonemason. And then he became a York Rites Mason. He got a doctorate in theology. He got a doctorate in historical anthropology. And once he was back home in 1977, he came back. He got his certified in archaeology too, so he's an archaeologist. But he came back home and quite surprised, maybe a little shocked to find out that all over New England these stone sites exist. So he joined my dad's group, a group called New England Antiquities Research Association. The name is really NERA, NERA. And that was started 60 years ago this year by my dad and a cousin and several other members, that were really into this. And so the group's still in existence, and he joined that eventually as a director of research. But he was really into the way these big stones were quarried from the bedrock, the way they were shaped, and then transported. From about almost 100 shovel test pits that were started in 1992 by our archaeologist. She's still alive. She was a president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. She was friends with David, as a circle, eventually all these people. But Dave was director of research at our site too, besides the group NERA, which is separate from us. There were two separate things.
right.
But she joined us to do archaeological work, and she was a president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, well respected, well known, not only in New Hampshire but in New England. She joined us in '89 and worked on a project. Then she started doing after 3 years, she did a different project of shovel test pits across the hilltop, measuring the soil depth, looking for geological and archaeological artifacts. In a shovel test pit, or an STP, is about 50 centimeters wide, square. You go down to hit a pre-occupational level where you don't think anybody existed below that level in the ground, or you hit bedrock. And she started mapping the site. And again, her husband was a doctor of geology at Tufts University. So he was a big aid in that, looking at if it's natural or is it man-made kind of thing, and he helped out the group too, her group. And anyway, her determination after doing this, and she was doing it from 92 to about 97. And then she got involved with other projects elsewhere. And then she came back to us. In the last 10 years, she started picking that up, and I helped her on quite a few of those STPs. So I think we did almost 100 of them across 110 acres. And what she felt is at the site, talking to her husband too at the time, is that the hilltop is probably about 75% bare bedrock. That would make it easy for a team to go out, look at the bedrock, pick an area that you want to separate the bedrock. The bedrock is foliated; it does come up in layers, but you have to know how to get in there and split it. So
Right.
being exposed, not covered with like it is today with trees and several inches to a foot or more of dirt. It's like walking around today. It's like, well, unless I remove this dirt, I don't know where to start. What do I do? Unless I have ground penetration radar or X-ray vision, I don't know where I'm supposed to look, for a candidate of bedrock to split. But thousands of years ago, bedrock was bare, pretty much, with some soil, some vegetation, maybe 25% of the hilltop.
Right.
And then when we detach a stone, we shape it, as I mentioned, how they would prop them up, and then they would start dressing the stone with stone hammers. Then our team would probably get log rollers, and it's a lot easier to move stones on bedrock with log rollers than to move stones on dirt with log rollers, which will just dig into the dirt, even if the ground is pretty frozen. Sometimes the ground will freeze up and makes it a little easier, but you have trees, you have brush, you have roots, and you have the dirt to contend with. It's going to be a lot harder 600 feet to the main site than it would have been back then. It was never an easy project, but I'd rather do it back then with bare bedrock. So Dave estimated how much manpower it would take to move these stones. He did a lot of study on that. But the stone weighs about 163 pounds per cubic foot, so we can give you estimates just by the dimensions of what the stone weighs. And
Right.
then he would come up with how much would it take to move a stone on a flat surface. But most of these had to be moved uphill, so that's additional force. We're dragging it up. It'd be better to be dragging it downhill, I think. And what we found in 1982, one of our staff members was having lunch out in what was just dense forest in 1982, and she sat on a stone, and she had been instructed, as well as others, by David Stewart Smith on what to look for. He says, you might find some of the quartz stones still out in the woods. They were maybe getting prepared to be moved into the site. You might find them raised. You might find the edge serrated. Just keep an eye out for that. And sure enough, in the summer of 82, she's sitting down by herself on this stone that was it was probably about 10 feet by maybe 5 feet. The edge of it was sticking above the ground. She sat on that. And as she's sitting there, she notices the edge of it's all dimpled. And then she notices it is elevated. She looked under it, I guess, and saw a propping stone, brought it to the attention of Dave and some of the other staff, and it was like, wow, this is what we're looking for. And 1983, they excavated and they found some of the flakes of stone that had been hammered off it. They didn't find the hammer stone itself. We have found those in other places, but the stone was being shaped. It had already been detached, raised, and shaped. And the next process would be to move it about 500 or 600 feet to the main site. It never happened. Since 1982, we have found 34 of those big slabs, as I may have mentioned a little bit earlier, all over the hilltop. And what we think is a work in progress. I think they had much bigger plans for the site, and it just came to a stop, which kind of really got to us in the last few years because we found so many of them. I'm sure we're going to find a few more of them out there propped up. Is what happened to these people? Why did they stop? Was it economic? Was it disease? Was it something changed in the climate? Was there any warfare? There's a lot of different, like speculation. It's kind of fun to think about it, but why did they have all this stuff ready to go and then they never finished it? One or two stones, okay, that's not too big of a deal, but 34 of them so far found all over the 110 acres at different distances. And again, most of them are downhill, so they would have had to drag them. And I think the site would have ended up, these look like roof slabs that would go on top of the structures, most of them, but there are some that look like wall slabs. So I think they had more buildings they were going to put up eventually. Wow. I don't know. We just don't know what happened, and even so
but preparations were being something in preparations were being undertaken for sure. Did you find any stone pathways that would enable them to be able to transport movement with logs being used on some of these larger? So any roadway of stones, in place?
Well, if they moved them on bedrock, it wouldn't leave too much behind, when you know what I mean, the log rollers or the bedrock. But there are ancient pathways up there. They were reported by Goodwin back in the 1930s, and we do know, however, if you go back to the 1860s, the hill was lumbered, by a guy named Nathaniel H. Paul. He had a lumber mill down the street. And he actually bought the property. He had it for about 28 years. So he must have done at least two lumber operations on the property. And then he sold it back to what we call the Patty family again, And so some of those could have been from his time period, but there's also a pathway that comes up from the Spigot River. It comes up by the glacial cliff shelter where we found pottery that dates to about 2,500 years. It's called Middle Woodland Period pottery. It goes by that, just looks like Mesa Verde, a little Mesa Verde almost, without the structures, just a big cliff overhang. And it was a shelter where people were living, probably seasonally during the summer. And that pathway goes from the river below it, goes up diagonally, and then it goes on top of the hill. And that may have been an ancient pathway. But yeah, if it's bedrock and you're rolling logs over, even with these multi-ton stones, once it goes past that area, you're not going to really see any evidence. You know what I mean? On the bedrock, it's solid. It just doesn't do anything. Right. I have been to Malta. I've been to Malta, and I saw where those cart tracks are. Those are pretty phenomenal, and without explanation. In Malta, they're pretty amazing. They go right up to the edge of a cliff, but we don't have anything quite like that. Right. So, but I think the bedrock was a good.
Symbols?
Oh,
any
symbols?
Symbols or things left behind, indicators or wigwam pottery or things of possibilities of relics that way through sifting samples and so forth.
Sure. I mean, Goodwin found, in Goodwin, later researchers have found hammerstones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers, stone cups, stone hoes, axe, stone adze, which is kind of a chopping stone,
Right.
on the main site. So these Stone Age, we have on pottery, and most of it, a lot of it came from the Paddy family in the 17 and 1800s. There were
Okay.
on the hill. But we have found Native American pottery. And I mentioned the glacial cliff shelter. We had that 20, it's middle woodland period pottery. On the opposite side, that's on the west side facing the Spigot River, which is a tributary of one of the biggest rivers in New England called the Merrimack River, which is about 6, 7 miles south of us. But on the east side of the of our property, near the parking lot, one of the shovel test pits found when they were doing it back around 1995 is a wigwam site, and it was where the post moles were. They were all rotted. All you see is the stains in the soil, 30 feet across, and in that they found three samples of charcoal from fire pits, and they
Hmm.
were dated in 1995, and the dates were 2,000 years old, 1,700 years old, and 1,200 years old. Obviously, a wigwam wouldn't last more than a decade or two. You'd have to keep, repairing it and so forth.
Right.
So it may have been might have been a place that they used several times. Over a long time, and maybe they didn't even realize that 200 years before somebody else had a wigwam in this area. But we carbon dated those samples, and there was a big spread from 2,000 to 1,200 years old
Wow.
across the parking lot, which was put again in 1957, 58. We found the cooking rack. We think underneath the parking lot, where all that gravel was put in over the years for our parking, for our
Hmm.
visitors, could have been a village. And we may run ground penetration radar. I have Doria. She's a woman that's been coming up since 2020. She's a geophysicist from Waltham, Mass, and she's been bringing her latest ground penetration radar. We had some of it in the 90s brought to our site, but she has the latest,
Yeah.
editions of that. And she's already done mapping on the Oracle chamber roof, where we got one of the optically stimulated luminescence cores. She actually mapped that with her device. And I'm going to have her do the underground drains, because whoever built the site
Right.
thought
That's
ahead of,
interesting.
yeah, they built a whole network of storm drains before they built the chambers, and they still work today. These drains, some are big enough for a little kid to climb through. I wouldn't advise it. They run anywhere from 12 to about 70 feet length, and she can use her radar to really accurately measure, map these. But her friend Tom Elmore, the gentleman with the lidar, came up before she did in 2020, and then he introduced us to her, and he did 16 acres with his lidar, handheld, $50,000 unit, and he came up several times from. He lives in Connecticut, and he brought that lidar up, and it can see down to a centimeter. It's
Wow.
amazing what you can see. And if we
Yeah.
had that decades ago, we would have picked out those serpentine walls, because there's no mistake when you look at the lidar imaging, you can see the serpentine walls. They stick out like a sore thumb, because he can get rid of brush, he can get rid of
Right.
trees, he can, and you can zoom in, you can zoom out. You can actually zoom out the space, like you can zoom into about a centimeter. You can read like a penny almost with his equipment. And he actually has he and she have actually got the software to blend her image with his imaging, and it's 3D above and below the ground now. It's pretty amazing. And she's going to come back and do more mapping. I just talked to her about 2 weeks ago, and Tom will come back. He's doing other sites from here all the way down throughout New England to Pennsylvania, and he's going to be doing a site down in Belize that's being worked on by another friend from Utah. I introduced him, and he's already been there with the team. I couldn't make it. I was too busy. I wanted to go down with him. Just a preliminary thing to look at the 7,000 acres that has Mayan ruins, and he wants
Right.
to map them with his LiDAR. I'm hoping to go down the next time they go down there and start their work, even for a couple of days to see this. It'd be kind of nice
Oh, I
to
would
get
love to
get
do that.
away.
Yeah, I would love.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I have seen some of the work being done, even in the Far East, and some other parts of the jungles throughout the world, where yeah, you could. It's amazing this cutting edge technology now that it can just remove everything and give us focal points. And
Exactly.
we're learning how much has been missed, how much overgrowth and dust and accumulation of systems of how soils evolve on top of bedrock have hidden things. And it doesn't take
Mm,
much but a few hundred years to actually have that effect take place.
yeah.
And it's pretty outstanding. One thing you brought up, though, just this blows my mind because when I first learned about these I think the term was used by a professor where I picked this up on was the Romans were actually introducing the system of sewers and ducts of protecting facilities and entertaining early bathrooms and so forth like that. Um, when you find drainage systems around these structures, is there any tie to a civilization of similarity?
Well, I could say in the northeast of those 800 sites, although they haven't been excavated, properly or thoroughly, or even touched in some cases, some of these structures haven't been touched at all. I was the only one that seemed to have these underground drains. And basically, what Goodwin found when he started cleaning, the bedrock was exposed in some areas and had a thin layer of soil in others, and debris and rubble and brush. As they cleaned that out, they started finding channels in the bedrock, and these channels are maybe 4 or 5 inches wide and a couple inches deep, and they actually channel the water and direct it into these underground drains.
Mhm.
And our site seems to be the only one we found so far with these, and they keep the bedrock dry because if you don't
Right.
have soil and vegetation 4,000 years ago, you need to channel the bedrock. Otherwise, you have puddles all over the site. We don't think the site is a living site. We think it's a ceremonial site. We didn't
Oh,
find
okay.
enough evidence to suggest that people made it a habitat site where you find the middens, the trash, and all of that. It seems to be more like people would come here, do their ceremonies, whether it's a marriage, life, a death perhaps, or maybe watching an astronomical alignment. And that's true of most megalithic sites in Western Europe. 50,000 of them seem to be places where people gathered, but they didn't live there. The only exceptions would be Skara Brae up in the Orkneys. They didn't have wood, so they built their homes out of stone. In a place called Stanleyvale in Great Britain, and that was another habitat built out of stone. Most part, they lived in hide, wood, or bark. And I think the site again, it's on a hilltop. It's closer to the heavens, if you will, and it's fairly clean archaeologically. I mean, we found those stone tools, which we believe are ancient, but we think they lived somewhere in the area, maybe down by the river. That was one of the investigations that Pat Hume was doing, trying to find their habitat site for years and years. But yeah, the underground drains are pretty cool, and we'll get those mapped with the radar. And tools and other things have been found inside of them by previous archaeologists. So maybe the radar will reveal some other interesting features about the drains, but it shows the sophistication. The site
Yeah,
wasn't
there's
just
an
thrown up.
intelligence, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, intelligence, exactly. Yeah. So some thought, planning, and then they did it. Because if they didn't do it right, those chambers would have been full of water. I mean, it would have been flooded in the spring. And also when we have heavy rain like we did last night, they'd be a mess.
Right.
So
So to me, it seems in a way like the possibility of others could have came here too. You can't take anything, off the plate when you're looking at all this.
yeah,
But it
exactly.
was it, and the fact that intelligence was a shared technology of learning and failure and successes. I found that's just mind blowing to me. Now, I don't want to off frame this at all too much, in the wrong way or to bring it up again. But was there any significant markings or carvings or anything that ever developed on within your area of the 110 acres? Like,
Oh, yeah, we meant to get to that. Yeah, I think we got off on some of the other
it's all
subject.
fun,
Yeah, it's on artifacts.
right?
Yeah, so the first carving found was by Malcolm Pearson himself. Probably, I think, 1937, the first year Goodwin owned the site and began its work. Malcolm photographed it. It's called the Running Deer carving. It's in the Oracle Chamber, the biggest structure still intact on the site. And it really doesn't look like a deer. It looks more to me like an ibex. An ibex is in Western Europe. In fact, there's several different ibex species, but the one that it looks like is the Iberic ibex, one from Spain and Portugal, because of
Oh,
the antler on the top. It is near what was originally a window, is now an exit to exit it for our visitors. So you go into this big, tall entrance of the structure, and then it's shaped like the letter Y, and it runs north, south, east, and west. And this is in the eastern part of the chamber, and there's a window there. Our question is, was that illuminated? Because we do have some illuminations inside of the structure. And the watch house is one of them that we found just recently. It's an amazing illumination on the spring equinox. But the deer calving, the problem is when they did a forestry project over the last couple years during the winter, they opened up all the avenues for the alignments. They opened up a couple of areas that we never opened, including the watch house, so the light can go into the chamber. It never could before until you go way, way back in time when the trees weren't there. Um, but we didn't get that particular avenue opened up. Maybe next time we do a forestry project, you can do it about every 15 years. It's for the health of the forest, wildlife. It's really a really good thing. And we had a licensed forest that went to college, University of New Hampshire, that we hired, and they did a great job. They protected all the stone features. And by the way, a similar project was done just before us in 110 acres down at North Stonington, Connecticut. And again, that covers 35,000 acres, but they had a conservation land of 110 acres, and they did that, and it came out wonderfully. It helps to protect the structures from trees falling down, uprooting, causing damage. So
Right.
that deer calving is one of them. In 1967, one of our guides during a tour looked up over his head, and that same, with that what we call the window right near the deer calving, was exiting the chamber, happened to look up, and there's an arrow carving there, which is cool. And we have it circled with white paint today so you can see it. However, around 67, that same year, a couple of stones were found in the chamber in ruins. A big roof slab, about 7,000 or 8,000 pounds, fell into the chamber. It's there today. And that chamber has yielded over the years 3 carbon datings. It also has yielded 3 stones with markings on them. And when those couple first stones were found in 67 and another one in 69 were put in our museum, they put a label on them as unknown markings. But it was Dr. Berryfell in 1975 that came along, and he was a professor at Harvard University, originally from New Zealand, went to school in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he worked at Harvard University. He was a invertebrate marine zoologist, but he was also an epigrapher, a person that studies ancient script. And he looked at these stones in 1975. In fact, he took one of them back to his home in Arlington, Massachusetts, not far from Harvard, or Cambridge. And he studied it. And he said, what you have here is a Phoenician writing. It's Iberic Punic. It's from Iberia, from Spain and Portugal. It's of that style. We know the Phoenicians came out of the eastern part of the Mediterranean, and they came across. They're originally from the Persian Gulf, they think. But also later, to speed it up a little bit, a long, long talk, but he actually found and identified Ogum, or what is properly pronounced Ogham. It's Celtic Ogham or Ogum.
Okay.
He mentioned Phoenician, and he also had Libyan. And he said all these cultures plus others were in Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. It was a launching site, he felt, to the New World. And they were multilingual. And these inscriptions are found not only here, but all the way out to the West Coast. They're found all the way down to South America. In Vermont, by the way, of all the New England, greater New England, New York, Pennsylvania, all of these sites in the Northeast going up to Quebec, even in Ontario, Vermont seems to have the most inscriptions of anywhere. And a lot of them are the Celtic Ogum or Ogham markings. But so our site, we do have inscriptions. They're very controversial. They always have been. Somebody has to explain them. If they're all Boy Scouts markings from here to California, up to Canada, all the way down to South America, there's a lot of explaining to do. Some of these were found back in the 1800s before some of the translations of these types of scripts were done. So how would somebody know how to write a correct, correct script before people could interpret the script? How could you do that and do it correctly is unknown. So Berryfell wrote America BC in 1976 on our 200th anniversary. He wrote Saga America, Bronze Age America, and he had a group called the Epigraphic Society with about 1,200 members. And he raised a lot of eyebrows in the academic world, particularly in archaeology, because they're archaeologists. They're not really into epigraphy or astronomy or geology. They're kind of really focused on their thing. And you need those different disciplines when you're doing this. And a lot of them don't do that. They just, this is my thing. I don't know about inscriptions. I don't know about astronomy, and I don't know about geology and ancient mariners and all of that stuff. So yes, we have found inscriptions. I found a couple of them in the 70s, and I found one in around 1998. I think it's also Ogum. It's actually still on the pathway, the return trail to the visitor center. It's still on the rock in situ. We have some in our visitor center on display, so when you come there, you can actually see some of these. But again, they're not just at our site; they're all over the Northeast, and they go right across into the South America. Yeah.
That's why I find it so fascinating. Why are we just learning about so much of this? I mean, I understand why. I think communication and development and an evolving uh, people that we um, are now getting to that pinnacle of point to where we want to know everything that's missing. We want the missing pieces to the puzzle, and that's what you do. That's the fascinating part. But people sit back and they wait to hear and understand, because there's other people out there, and you're going to be doing lectures with some people coming up too. If you feel like making mention to that, would be great. But did you ever have Scott up there to uh, observe anything, or some of his work? Were you able to conclude anything that was matching, that had to do with landmarkers, or um, the ancients looking at the stars? Have you had any help that way?
Yeah, everybody has been helpful, with different ideas and theories. That always helps. Scott came to us, and actually, I think probably around 2009, they did a special on History Channel, and I think it had about the Knights Templar, and then 2 years later, that same company. Committee Films from Minnesota did Who Are the First Americans, and Scott was part of that show too. We became his. I think we were part of his fourth episode, I think, and it came out in 2013. They filmed us in 2012. It's because my son found an alignment with Stonehenge. It's on the summer solstice sunrise. It goes from the central platform where there are two cairns. It goes from the north cairn, all to a stone circle in front of the stone, to the stone itself, the monolith. And then if you look, you can actually see it today because we did that forestry thing and really see it now. The far distant horizon actually has a notch found by two hills. It's natural, but ancient people did that in Europe too. It's called the horizon feature. My son took it on Google Earth, not Google Maps, back in 2012. He was between college, semesters, and he took it right across Maine. He continued it right across the ocean. He'd been to Stonehenge too a couple of times. It went right across the ocean, and it ended up in southern
Where
England,
did it
kind of.
go? That's what I want to know. Where did it
Yeah,
go?
what it did was a shock. It went right through the center of Stonehenge, went through one of the large trilithons. And so it was kind of like, if it's coincidental or whatever, it was pretty like, wow. When I saw that for the first time, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my dad had just passed away. I said, gee, I wish my dad could see this. Even if it's
Right.
a big coincidence, that is pretty cool. It goes right through the center of Stonehenge, through one of the big, of the five horseshoe-shaped trilithons. Some of them are fallen, but it goes through one of the big ones that's standing. It's pretty amazing. And then we started finding others, like True South. My son taught me how to use Google Earth, and it goes right through Machu Picchu. The winter solstice sunset goes southwest. It ends up in Mexico. It goes to the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan, north of Mexico City, which I've been to. And the equinox sunset goes through the Sun Temple at Mesa Verde. We've been out there a couple times. And then the equinox sunrise goes through the Canary Islands. And on the Canary Islands, there are pyramids. And it goes right through those pyramids on Canary Islands, which I didn't realize. That's another one of my bucket list I'd like to go visit. So there are other ones that align too. So it's either coincidental. The skeptics would say definitely everything's coincidental, even our
How many
astronomical.
have to be?
you know, but that's just their excuse or their answer to this site, because it shouldn't. Our site shouldn't exist. It's a UPAT. It's an out of place archaeological artifact, if you will. And we've
Right.
had people, when Goodwin was around in the 30s, he had a running battle with Samuel Eliot Morison from Harvard University, the great naval historian, who said no explorers before Columbus, and the acronym was NEPCO, no explorers before. Native Americans have been in New Hampshire now. We know that same group my archaeologist was part of. They found 13,000-year-old evidence 100 miles west of here in New Hampshire, which is amazing. That's right at the glacial period. How did they survive? So people have been here for a long time. So you have to look at Native
Yeah.
Americans. But there seems to be old world, the style of the structures, the size and shape, the orientation, the inscriptions, and some of the alignments seem to indicate maybe an old world presence here. I know I don't like to get into politics or political correctness or any of that. I just want the truth. I don't care who these people who are, that built the site. We're just looking for answers. We're not looking for, it has to be these people because we can't accept this. We hear that, it's like, that's not our interest whatsoever. We want to know the truth. Whoever it ultimately is that built the site, we would love to know who they were.
Right. And we
Uh,
know that there were travelers, just because if anybody does any sitting back, suffering through cabin fever this time of the year, watching Oak Island and some of these other shows, where off lot 5 they find a lake cross or half coins, Roman half coins that go back 2,000 years. I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't brought at a later date and time, but things are being dated, and many questions are coming up that pertain to things. And I think for someone to say that it was impossible that nobody was here before Christopher Columbus, and um, goes back to a narrative of why Christopher Columbus was putting Red Cross sails on his ships before arriving into some of the parts of the North Americas here. So
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of questions.
I'm sorry, I cannot fall into that. I'm within
Yeah,
your system of full
yeah,
support. So let's
yeah.
talk about your book a little bit, because we've been
Sure.
on for some time. I don't know how much free time you actually have.
Oh,
Also, if you want to
I'm
bring
good.
anything up about, I think your father Robert was involved with David Goldward, and they actually did an early version of some type of book together.
Sure. I mean, we're mentioned in the History of Salem, 1907, Edgar Gilbert. In fact, he wrote the History of Salem in 1907, but it was started by a different gentleman in the 1890s. So there's a mention of the site back then. It said it's a wild but beautiful spot among the rough boulders and soft pines, about which the most weird and fantastic tales may be woven. Edgar Gilbert. He was a friend of Robert Frost, and this book came out in 1907. But the first book on us was by William Goodwin, that first researcher. And he started in 36 when he first saw our site, and he worked on other sites like the Hopkinton Chamber, which is near where the Boston Marathon starts every year, the
Okay.
Acton Chamber nearby, and then the Upton Chamber was the first one with Malcolm Pearson. And then Malcolm introduced him to Hopkinton, Acton, and then said, hey, by the way, I've read about this site up in North Salem, New Hampshire. So when Goodwin visited our site, he was blown away by it. His book came out in 1946. He wrote 4 books. And the book that really is about us is the book called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England. And he thought that the Vikings, when he first came to our site, might be the builders. But the next year when he bought it and he started cleaning, he says, and he did more research, he realized Vikings didn't build these stone structures. They built out of sod, and they had wooden roofs, primarily.
Right.
And I've been to Iceland and I've been to Newfoundland, and I can see what the Vikings built. It doesn't look like our site. Our site is a stone site. So he thought maybe it was Irish colony monks escaping the Viking persecution. So he died in 1950 still believing that. So his book, The Ruins of Great Ireland, New England, was the first one. 1977, The Mystery Hill Story came out by Mark Feldman, and my dad helped Mark with that book. In 2003, David Goudsworth, he was from Haverhill, Mass, neighboring town. He worked at our site over 40 years ago for a while. He's living in Florida, I believe now. But he put together that book with my dad's help, The Mystery Hill Story. And in the last 5 years, we decided, because of all the different finds we have, and it's been almost 2 decades, we needed to do another book. So I started my book right after we did a new souvenir book, replacing that 1996 book by one of our staff members. She did a wonderful job on that book, but it kind of fell out of date and went out of print. So we did a book in 2019, our souvenir book. That was really my first book, although it's more of a souvenir book. And I found writing a full textbook was a lot more difficult, between COVID and having a granddaughter, my daughter-in-law was helping me. That slowed things down quite a bit. And then we picked it up this year and we finally finished it. And I was going to mention one thing. Scott Walters will be here on the 23rd. We're going to be doing a whole day thing up here. And one of his topics, I think, on his PowerPoint will be about Oak Island. I know you mentioned Oak Island in the green room and maybe after.
Yeah, I've been
So,
trying to get a buzz. I know some of these people out
yeah,
here doing
yeah,
this work, and we
yeah.
know that something is come to light, and mysteriously now shows kind of like went zap. Just saying. So I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
there is
we'll
going to be
find
some
out.
kind of reveal with that
Yeah,
lecture and going
yeah.
on. Yeah,
Yeah, it'll be interesting. He'll be talking. Ronnie LeBanc from the Travel Channel,
right.
Expedition Bigfoot. But Ronnie's into all sorts of different things too. But he's on that TV show. Like Scott has a show now on Gaia TV, the subscription one. And then a friend, Haley, who's working with Scott, she's going to be doing her presentation. She does tours in Scotland. She's going to be doing a Spain, Portugal tour this summer. She did a tour across from Newfoundland, from Halifax, Canada, all the way down to Washington, D.C., and they did visit Oak Island, and then they spent the day at our place. So Scott was with her on that one a year and a half ago, so they've already done a presentation at our site. So we're excited about that. It'll be a couple days after the equinox, and it'll be a full day. And anybody's interested in that, they can go to HaleyARamsey.com, and there's information. There's a way to purchase tickets there. There's still some openings for that event. She's actually filled it up pretty well, but there's still a few openings for that. And it'll be a long day and a very fun day with a sunrise. And we'll be there to the evening for kind of a paranormal sky watching thing too. But it'll be an all-day event. But this is my book. I don't know if you can see it. This is actually
Bring it a little closer, brother.
yeah, I'll bring it right in there.
There you go. There you
Yeah,
go.
it's this is just a
Is
proof.
that you under the hat, or is that your father?
No, in fact, Haley thought it was me under the hat. That's our archaeologist. That's our Pat Hume, and she's in her. I believe she's in her 80s, and she's kind of retired to Florida with her daughter now. You know, she just stopped 2 years ago. She just couldn't do all the heavy duty, work, and when you're out there in the field doing archaeology, it's a bit of work. So we put her on the front cover. I had a couple other covers I showed to you, which I really loved, but the family
thank
kind
you
of
for doing that. I appreciate you asking for my input. I mean, I take that as a compliment. I told you that before the show. Thanks.
You did, yeah, and I certainly, we definitely we appreciate that. And that actually is, I don't know where the camera is, but that's a title. That's a title page with one of the sunsets. That originally is going to be one of my front cover options. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's winter solstice sunset.
I will definitely, because I have access to what you have shared. I will make up a little thing, and I'll make sure that I torment everybody to look at it. I'll put it throughout the groups. I mean, because look, we know what you're doing is important work, and anybody who follows me understands I speak on important factors. It doesn't matter what they are, but knowledge is everything. Knowing is everything. It keeps us evolving, and I also think it creates interesting conversation at the dinner table. Which is another lost art because of so much of the scroll down or you'll never know. And I tell people that is truth, but look for the facts. It makes for great conversation pieces. I'll make sure I do something. I promise.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, that's what we try to do. We try to show all the facts, data, and evidence that's been collected for about 87 years on the site. We try not to speculate too much, but we do have some theories. We try to put those out there. And I know mainstream still thinks there's no ancient stone ruins in the Northeast. They shouldn't exist here, and yet out west there's over 1 million mounds that were built by ancient man. And you mentioned seeing things from the air. Our serpent walls, a couple of them really, you need to be up in the air to look at them. They look real. You can see them from the ground level, but when you get above them, and that LiDAR, actually you can do that in that handheld LiDAR. It makes you look like you're in a drone. It's simply amazing to see these things from above. Maybe they were meant for the gods above to witness them. But people don't realize that we have the geoglyphs, like you see out in the NASCAR plains in Peru, and also I think they're in Argentina. It's either Argentina or Chile. Has a 50,000 square mile with this desert artwork with people, animals, and and so they're in California too. And I learned about this, probably in the 90s. I think I first heard of it, but I didn't pay much attention. But it's on the Colorado River. It's in Southern California, and it's called the Blythe Indialagos. Blythe Indialagos. If your listeners Google that, you'll be quite surprised to see the same kind of artwork you'll see in Peru, in California, and it's ancient. And I don't think they've determined the age of it, but it's ancient artwork in the desert. It's over 200 different figures, including people, if you will, and animals, and even the serpent. The serpent's there too, and I always look for the serpent because we're interested in that. But they actually go east. These kind of figures go right into Kansas, believe it or not, which is, 1,500 miles away or whatever. So the United States has a lot of ancient history, the cliff dwellings, the Indian medicine wheels, which we visited up in Montana. And there's even the serpent thing in California. If you go to the northern part, there's a serpent, like I mentioned, walls earlier, but there's also the Berkeley Wall, which actually starts in Santa Cruz. And that's been on Scott Walter's show too. Nobody knows who built it, how long it's been there. I think optically stimulated luminescence, if they have enough dirt next to the wall, they might be able to come up with a date. It's $1,000 per sample. That might be a candidate for that. But it stretches up towards the Canadian border. And some people suggest it's the ancient Chinese, because it looks like not the Chinese wall that you see today, but the more earlier version, more cruder version, if you will, not all those nice cut stones. it looks more like that. And I know the jury's still out on the Berkeley Wall, but so there's things on the West Coast. And by the way, these serpent walls supposed to be in Oregon and Washington State. I'm still looking for photographs. I'd like to go out there and look for them myself, but I'm waiting for pictures from somebody. We've talked to a few people that are out that way, including a neighbor's son that lives in Redding, California. Maybe get some photographs so we can see if they in fact look like a serpent, you know?
Right.
So this country's loaded with ancient sites.
I
Um,
believe it. Yeah, I
yeah,
find it so
you know.
fascinating. I appreciate your work. Like I told you, you are writing history, and that's not a joke. And I try to create awareness so people understand that there is more to the story in the United States of America. Of course, we won't always or ever probably have all the answers, but I think, because of good people like you that are motivated, and many others and many other names that you've mentioned today, numerous names, have all taken that step to move forward to try to understand. And now you're opening the door for the younger people, and you'll be handing off your book and all the information in it for them to study from and to continue it further. I find good things to happen as long as we keep a persistence of pressure to a system, to keep the disclosure coming of factual things, and that we also start protecting, not tearing apart to build other structures. It's like when you talk about Göbekli Tepe, certain things are dated iffy or about 11,700 years ish or so. A couple people disagree, but nevertheless, we also see different foundations being laid upon foundations. So it's repeated civilizations of some way where answers lie, but we don't have the answers to all the questions. And um, I'm sure your book's going to lay out and be very informative for all the readers to go through it, where you'll have everything documented out in a way that, and hopefully in layman's terms, because some
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
whoever
yeah.
gets new to the fact of the theory, well, it'll be more easier for them to comprehend it. Otherwise, I'm going to have you back on shows, and which I would love to do. I would love to go into some, serious madness of archaeology. I love that. I'll be doing a show with Mark Oley that's going to be covering some of ancient structures and peoples and knights and noblemen and who they were. And, there could be a lot of things tying together here. There just really could be.
Well, I would love to be on your show again. Yeah, it's slowly the truths are coming out very, very slowly, even at our site. You know, it's decades in the making, and there is a resistance, among academia, archaeologists, anthropologists, and that. Also, the media. The media. I mean, they're more interested in politics, I think, than they are in. I mean, these are real sites. You can actually go and see these
Yeah.
sites. You can, and I think they're interesting, and you can learn from the past, as my dad said, and many others. You can't learn from the future yet. We haven't had that experience, but this site is. And David Stewart Smith, kind of before he died in 2016, he goes, it's like across the Northeast, and he wasn't really aware some of these things go to California now and elsewhere, but he said it looks like it's an ancient lithic or stone building culture that's been forgotten, not recognized, unknown, and in some cases, by academia and the media, kind of like basically ignored. They don't want to deal with it. And they'll just dismiss it. So that's kind of how it stands. Although maybe with scientific evidence, not just opinions, maybe we'll find out some of the answers, and maybe they'll start to come around if they have open minds, at least to look at the evidence instead of just dismissing it, without researching it or studying it. And that's what we hope. But we're trying to deal with the facts of the site. Everybody has an opinion. If it's based on facts, that's good. If it's just based on an opinion, I mean, that's not really scientific. I mean,
No,
it's not proof. So,
no, you
but
got.
we don't know either. We don't know all the answers for sure. As you said, we may never know, all the answers.
Well, you're getting there. You're getting there, and you're
Slowly.
working.
Yeah,
You listen. That's all we can do. Take those steps,
yeah.
because we can blame it on a lot of things and broken land bridges and tectonic plates shifting the earth, or people that had this type of technology and drainage systems and looking at the stars and making what I call the stone time clocks and stuff like that. That's a little fun term I came up with, but it's factual. And maybe there were ships out there way before. I mean, way before we even understand it. I mean, we don't understand the entirety or the immensity of it, which keeps it more fascinating than everything. And I know some of what I just said has nothing to do with, but it could be how some of the early visitors from wherever, whoever they are, as the unknowns, as you said, got here. And of course, you can only hope for where good, honest people do work. And I know it's costly. It's nice to be able to get grants and to go forth. But
Yeah.
when you get those grants too, then you also get that kind of a control thumb narrative, like we can't talk about it. Findings are good, but don't talk about it.
Yeah.
That's the sad part. But it's been wonderful having you on. You want to tell everybody where we can purchase your book from? Is it purchasable yet?
I think that's coming. My wife and my daughter-in-law are handling the publisher kind of.
Okay.
So the proof is here. We actually yesterday sent back to the publisher the final copy. We had to do a couple little corrections. It should be, I would think in a week or two, we got in several dozen of them. They should be in our gift shop, but they'll also be available on Amazon. And they get like free shipping with Amazon. And I don't have the date of that yet, but it'll be on Amazon. It'll be America Stonehenge and the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire. I think they Google that in there whenever it becomes available, and they can actually, get a hard copy. I don't know if it's going to go electronic, like on Kindle yet, but it will be in our gift shop, and then we'll probably go out and do some book signings. If we do some lectures, we'll bring them on the road with us, that kind of thing. But we'll have them in our gift shop. And if somebody can't seem to get it on Amazon, they can, contact us. Our website is stonehengeusa.com. It has an email on there, so they can contact us through that, or a phone number. We have a phone number there. On that, too, is our 11-minute video we show in the theater. So for listeners right now, they want us to do an 11-minute video. But the other really cool thing is on that website is we have a free mobile app download. And when you do that, you can do a complete virtual tour of the site. And as you do it, it will talk to you. It has pictures and text. If you use that at our site with your smartphone, you can actually walk around and it takes you on the complete tour. We also have a paper map, and that kind of map we've been using since the 60s. It's 4 pages. So if your phone dies up on the site, you can still continue the tour with a paper map. And then there's links in that too, links to that other different interesting types of organizations like NERA and other organizations and other places too. So the website's very good. And again, if they have a question about the book, and I don't know exactly what day we're going to be getting those, they can either call us or email us. And again, it should be on Amazon coming up. That was a publisher, actually.
Or Follow the Stones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My last name.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. I mean, come on. I'm not trying to create bad humor here. I think there's points to that madness. But again, so we're up to our 90 minutes, and I just a couple minutes away from it. So I want to thank you. You are a good soul. You really are. And you've opened my mind. I hope that what we talked about and what was represented here today on America Disclosing is a step into the future for the truth in many ways, and for knowledge to be shared to you, yourself, your family, your children. And that's truly what I like to see come across the format. Sometimes I do. You brought up UFOs earlier, and that's part of what I do too. And I try to touch base on anything and every, kind of like, I guess, a Scott, or some people say you're between David Icke and Alex Jones, and then some nights you're like Bob O'Dean and Jimmy Church. I don't know, or George Murray. But I enjoy having all the guests on.
Oh, thank you.
And you were wonderful, and I want to thank you for your time, and I wish you well and your family well. And the magic water, I really hope you keep that as an idea, because that'll be a support factor for probably future endeavors as to how you answer more questions there. And I think that's important. So if that does happen and you were to utilize the spring, anything I can do at any time, if you share it, I'm friends with you, I'm going to blast it out there.
Oh, thank you so much. And if we do another show together, which I would love to do, my mom was friends with Betty Hill, for the Interrupted Journey with Bonnie and Betty Hill. And Travis Walton's been to our site, Kathleen Marden. And David Fravor from the TikTok, he from Ohio, was in San Diego. He lives down the street near one of these structures about 7 miles away in Windham, New Hampshire. So I'm hoping that he'll visit someday. We can talk flying, we can talk UFOs, you know.
I'd
So,
like to, yeah,
yeah.
I actually was in the background on a show with Travis
Oh,
Walton.
really? And Travis
Yeah.
is wonderful. I met him
Uh,
twice. He's been. I did a VIP tour at our site. I still got pictures of him. He was here about 5 years ago, and hopefully he'll come back again. You know, he's way out in Arizona, but he's a wonderful guy too. So
yeah, a show I was in, not to pat myself on the back, and I'm a little guy out here, just having fun, and I like to, I love knowledge. I love to know. Anyway, I was asking questions through Sean Kelly, who was a constituent of mine on Chasing Prophecy, with Jenny Nicarcio, John. John, he was on Hangar One. Anyway, John got Travis to come on, and it was pretty inciting and fun to hear his story from his side in real time, because you hear things and you don't know what facts are until you do a show with somebody and you're there controlling the element of the show. And
exactly,
it's not being edited. Nothing's being, and I thought it was a really fun thing. And it's good to see that you're getting support from people out there too, on a much wider scale that way. So from me to you, you're a rock star. Thank you. You're a good soul. And I hope that we get to do something again in the future. Anything you post, I will repost it out there and share all your products to the world, as far as your book and the possibility of that great bottle of water that may come into the future. And I'll try to do anything I can. So whatever you post, just know I will. It's been a pleasure. It really has. Dennis Stone, thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you and your audience. I had a wonderful time, and I look forward to the next talk with you. So, and have a wonderful week now. Thank you.
Appreciate it, sir.
Take care.
All right. Take care. What an interesting guest with a lot of information. Just wonderful. So this is America Disclosing Uncensored. I hope you enjoyed this little mind-opening conversation that we just had. I know I did. It was wonderful. So please stay involved, the best you can. If you can, like and share. I'd appreciate it. I have more content coming with great guests. I know I won't touch base on everybody's most favorite things, but hey, if you also tell me what you like, if you really share me what you like, I'll blow a few whistles and call a few favors. I'm capable of doing some things in ways. But hey, I hope you have a great day today. I know the world's tough, so stay strong out there. Do the best you can, and I'll be on soon. I have a really special show coming up. I really do. I know a lot of people are into the unknown of paranormal and cryptids and all this, but this is the most fascinating segment. It's going to be part one with a conclusion, meaning it's going to be a two-part show, night after night, 2 nights in a row, a Friday and a Saturday. And that's coming up next week on Friday the 15th. I'm in the development of how that's working. I also have some other great guests coming on and some invites out to people. We're just trying to coordinate dates and times. Also, I want to just say Brad Olson was on with me. He has a new book out. If you'd like to read, check out Brad's book. Laura Eisenhower. Brad helped publish that book, or he's actually the person responsible for doing it. So these are great guests and people that I'm in contact with, and I'm hoping to take further steps into the future having them on. And I hope you will enjoy that. So from here to me and back to you, thank you so much for everybody that did watch, like, and share. And Linda Roberts, I just want to say hello to you. I saw you guys were there, but it was kind of a deep scenario conversation today. I hope you got some things from it. My girl from the stars. I call her my girl from the stars, I discovered her. No, she's a beautiful woman. She really is. Beautiful person. And she makes contact. Kimberly, it's my rock star. She's my rock star. She really is. Joe Fox was in. Susan Haddix always is there. Thank you so much. Just to name a few of you guys. Anyway, do what you can if you can share. I'd appreciate it. You guys have a great day. Try to look for my content because, you know what I'm up against. Have a great night.